Welcome on behalf of the Insight Meditation Community Washington, IMCW, and the Center for Mindful Living, which is part of IMCW, and from me as well. Welcome. And we're saying some of us went yesterday down to the March for Our Lives. It's quite powerful, I think, just being there and knowing that there were hundreds of other actions around the country calling for an end to gun violence, and for our leaders to take action to ease that suffering, lessen that suffering, which we all know is possible, but so difficult at these times. So good to be with you today. If you're new to this class, the format is very straightforward. We begin with a meditation of about 20 minutes or so, and then I'll give a talk, probably about 30 minutes or so. We normally have some mindful movement, but Emily's at a memorial service today, so she won't be with us. So we'll have some sharing in small groups or in the full group, and then we'll come back and have a final meditation and some announcements. So the theme for today is talking about the three characteristics of existence, what are called in the Pali called anicca, Dukkha, and anatta. Anicca meaning change or impermanence, Dukkha meaning suffering or unsatisfactoriness or unreliability, and anatta meaning not self, not me, not mine. And I spoke last week about the seeing things through the lens of impermanence. And the point I see of reflecting on these three characteristics is that when we do, for example, when we're experiencing, let's say we're having a difficult experience, we're experiencing a difficult emotion that's painful, maybe it's grief or it's worry, fear, whatever, that if we reflect on the impermanence of this emotion or these feelings, it can open space around the emotion or the feeling so that we can be less hooked in it, we can be less tangled up in it, we can see it more as something that, it's real in the sense that it's, we experience it energetically in the body and the mind, but it doesn't last forever. And it doesn't need to lead to suffering if we are able and willing to open wholeheartedly to it, turn towards it rather than getting in a struggle with it. Because when we get in a struggle with our experience, we perpetuate it. If we get in a struggle with, I shouldn't be feeling this anger, we judge ourselves for it, then we get locked in even more entanglement. If we can just experience the feelings of anger or grief or whatever it is and let them come and go, then they can, as the Tibetan Buddhists say, they can self-liberate, they can free themselves. We don't need to kind of be in a fight or a struggle with them. So we're looking at these three characteristics, and today we'll look at the second of these, which is dukkha. Dukkha, often translated as suffering, and I like, although it's a long and clunky word, unsatisfactoriness. The unsatisfactoriness, this feeling of dissatisfaction that things shouldn't be like as they are, they should be different, and the struggle that we can have around that. And then next time we'll look at the third, which is what people often have the most challenge with, which is anatta, the not self, the selflessness really of all phenomena, or everything, lacking, the Buddha said, in a permanent self. There's not a permanent self. Everything arises dependent on conditions. You know, there's nothing that we say, this is me, this is mine, or this is permanent. So what we'll do, we'll have a meditation, and I'll bring these qualities, these characteristics into the meditation, and then I'll talk about it. So using the main point being using these three characteristics as ways of looking or ways of seeing our experience can help us let go. That's the purpose of them, really, to kind of see, okay, if I just bring the understanding of impermanence to what is here, can that be a way of untangling ourselves from the experience, kind of seeing it in a larger context and kind of letting it come and go in that way? And that's really what this is all about. It's not about a philosophical statement that, you know, there is no self or everything is impermanent. You know, all of this is a really just skillful means to help us to let go. All of the teachings are about helping untangle us from suffering, you know, seeing where we're holding on and letting go. So with that, I invite you to just come into a comfortable, relaxed posture, sitting. If you like, you can close your eyes, let your attention come inward, and let your awareness drop down out of the thinking mode. We spend a lot of time in thought and planning, worrying, remembering, and just letting thought go as much as you can for now, and just letting yourself feel the body where you are, feel the body on the chair, feel the weight pushing down, feel the points of contact with the surface beneath you. Pressure, hardness, warmth, coolness, tingling, pulsing, whatever's here. Let yourself just settle into being here. You might invite the shoulders to relax and the chest be open so you can breathe easily. Just letting the body sink into the surface beneath you. Then you might take a few longer, deeper breaths just to help you relax and settle. Just be here. Breathing in, filling the lungs, filling the chest. And then relaxing, letting go on the out-breath. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. Relaxing, letting go on the out-breath. It's helpful to remember that you can come back anytime to your breath. Maybe it's to take some deeper breaths if you're caught up in something, a difficult emotion or a mind state, just to invite a couple of deeper breaths and help you relax, resettle. Just be here. Remembering the smile too, that you can consciously invite a smile, and that can send a message to our brain and to our nervous system that we can be at ease, we can relax, that we don't have to be hyper vigilant. Just allow us to settle. So it can be helpful to think of a loved one or somebody who easily makes you feel happy, joyful, peaceful. Just inviting the smile to the corners of your eyes and the corners of your mouth. Inviting the smile down into your body, down into your heart. Imagine the smile warming your heart. So that everyone and everything you meet, you can meet with warmth, with kindness. It's really befriending your experience. You might take a moment too to just reflect on gratitude, on a few things in your life that you feel grateful for. And if when you reflect on gratitude, maybe a feeling of warmth, some other feeling comes up, allow yourself to experience that. Allow, if it's in the heart area or somewhere else, just let it be there, let it spread. Just take in the good feelings that can come. Meister Eckhart said, if the only words you ever said were, thank you, that would be enough. Thank you for what I've been given. And the Tibetan Buddhists have a prayer of, may I be given sufficient measure of suffering that will allow me to awaken my heart in compassion. And we can be grateful for the difficulties that help us wake up, help us see more clearly. Let go. Allow yourself to open to whatever is present for you right now. The pleasant, the unpleasant, the neutral in between. And if it's helpful, you might let your attention rest on the experience of the
Here's my meditation team.
welcome those joining us. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, just know that you're breathing in. Breathing out, know that you're breathing out. Whenever the mind goes off into thought and you notice it, just pause there and incline the mind back. Just let it come back to the body, to your breathing. No need to add anything to the experience. We're just bringing awareness to the mind's habitual tendencies to go off. You know, it's not a problem, it's not a failing, just something to be noticed. And then to just incline the mind back. Breathing in, breathing out. We can use these three characteristics in our meditation. So whatever you're aware of right now, you might look at just through the lens of impermanence. Everything that's going on, your breathing, bodily feelings, emotions, thoughts, sounds, are all impermanent and are all changing, coming, staying for a while, and then passing. So if we can see all of our experience in this way, through the lens of impermanence, of change, and may see that, may make some space, open some space for letting go. Because when we get tangled in something, in strong emotion or a thought process, we kind of have the illusion that things are permanent. We stop things, we hold on to them, or we try and push them away. We're denying that they're changing. We're trying to solidify them, hold on, push away. Here we're just bringing awareness to the way everything does just come and go. And that if we don't get in a conflict with it, then everything can come and go without being a problem. Doesn't mean we do nothing. We could do something, but we do something not from a place of reactivity, but just from a place of awareness and kindness. So just notice what happens when you bring this way of looking, this lens of impermanence to your experience. That's the only question that really matters. Is it helpful? Can it be helpful? Maybe it's not helpful at this moment, but could it be helpful to just bring that way of looking, everything impermanent, changing? And we can do the same with this second characteristic, just slight adjustment from seeing change to seeing everything as unreliable, unsatisfactory, can't be clung to, and nothing can be held on to. And so whatever words might work best could just be dukkha, or can't be clung to, unsatisfactory. Just seeing our experience through this lens of dukkha. So it's not a problem that things are unsatisfactory, that they can't provide lasting happiness or satisfaction. But when we see our experience through this lens, then again we don't have to become entangled with our experience. It can just come and go. And the third of these characteristics is to see everything as not self, not me, not mine. You know, when we get caught up in things, we tend to see them through the lens of self, my anger, my grief. You know, we tend to solidify it. And this way of looking helps us kind of see it more impersonally. You know, yes, there may be sadness here, but if I don't hold on to it as my sadness, then can it just come and go? You know, like a weather system passing through. Just simply observing with anything, not me, not mine. See what happens when you do that. And with this, the second characteristic of dukkha, may be particularly helpful to just simply allow whatever is present to be here, to come and go in its own time. Just saying yes to whatever is present. When we welcome, open, allow what's here to be here, we're really ending the struggle with our experience. where rather than getting in a fight with it, I want this, I want to hold on to this, I want to get rid of that, or I'm bored with that, I want to check out from that. We just allow what's here to come and go in its own time. There's more space open up, more freedom open when you adopt this way of looking, allowing what's here to be here. So using these ways of looking as skillful means to help perhaps open up some space, to help let go of something that you might be holding on to, clinging to, pushing away. Is this helpful? You might just check in with yourself whether now or at another time it might be a helpful way of providing more space, more peace, more ease. Untangling ourselves from the way we get kind of hooked on experience, make it into I or mine, think that we can hold on to it. Give it a certain permanence, solidity that it doesn't necessarily have. To finish this from Raymond Carver, late fragment. And did you get what you wanted from this life, even so? I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth. Did you get what you wanted from this life, even so? I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth. So take your time Opening your eyes, coming back into the group. Welcome everyone. Welcome those who joined us maybe a little later. I hope that meditation may have given some suggestions of things, kind of ways that we can practice that may be helpful. In the end, the question that really all of these practices come down to is it helpful? Does it help open the heart? Does it help us be present? And if it doesn't, then maybe that's not something to put a lot of time and energy into. Although it's good to give something time to explore so that, we're not just defaulting to our habitual mind and what we like and dislike and things, which we can easily do. Is it helpful? So I want to share a few reflections kind of on more broadly on these three characteristics, particularly today, the second one, these three characteristics of existence, or three marks of life, they're sometimes called: anicca, dukkha, and anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness or unreliability, and non-self. And our focus today mainly on the dukkha, the second of these characteristics. What I want to emphasize is these characteristics are not something to believe. We're not supposed to believe that there isn't a self or believe that everything is unsatisfactory and changing. It's really, they're, I think, most helpfully seen as ways of looking at our experience, kind of lenses through which we look at our experience. As in the meditation, looking at what happens when I look at this experience on my day in terms of impermanence. Does something open up? Does it give me a more of a perspective? Does it help me let go, untangle myself from whatever I might be caught up in? That's really what these are. These are ways of looking, ways of seeing that can be skillful, that can be helpful in helping us let go of clinging. That's the idea. That's what we're really working with here. Not about, you have to believe this or believe that. And this second of these three characteristics, dukkha, really is at the heart of the Buddha's teachings. I'm sure most of you know, the Buddha, for the Buddha, the central question really of life was, is there an end to suffering? Is it possible to live this human life free of suffering? You could say that in a, if you like, in a more affirmative way. Is true happiness, genuine freedom possible in this human life? That would be or it would be saying exactly the same thing, but it would be emphasizing what, the kind of the more positive end of it. Suffering, Buddhism gets a bit of a bad name because people think, oh, it's all about suffering, kind of it's a downer, but as I often say, it's half of it is about suffering and the other half is about the end of suffering. The two parts of it are really shorthand. When we cling, we suffer. When we let go of clinging, we find freedom. So you can emphasize, either of those. If the Buddha was coming to Madison Avenue in the 21st century, he'd probably be told, let go of the suffering stuff, focus on the happiness, focus on what you can get. You see in the magazines, you don't see the front page saying suffering, suffering, suffering. Typically, at least, you see more, oh, you can be happy, you can be peaceful, you can be joyful. The Buddha, I think, was kind of more down to earth and realistic. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of suffering, and this is why we suffer, and this is how we get out of it. So, either side, we could emphasize either side of that. And Buddha did talk about his teachings. He said, I teach a path of happiness that leads to the highest happiness. And he and his followers were actually known in their lifetimes as the happy ones. They experienced deep joy, even though they didn't, have possessions and things that we associate 650-foot yachts and private planes and things. Good luck with many of us. So his whole life journey, really, from his life as a noble prince, life of comfort and luxury, into letting go of all that and becoming homeless and practicing ascetic, practices. They were all about this question, is there an end to suffering? And he found the answer to that question for himself, as under the tree, under the Bodhi tree, under the tree in Bodh Gaya in India, that there is an end to suffering. If we can find, if we can open to suffering and see our own role in perpetuating it, then we can let go of suffering. And he said there's a skillful path to the end of suffering. So there is, he found an end to suffering. Then, he taught for 45 years and shared his teachings. The first of his teachings was the teaching on the Four Noble Truths about suffering and the end of suffering. So his teachings invite us, the Buddha's teachings invite us to investigate the suffering in our own life and let go of the clinging that perpetuates suffering. So the invitation is not to believe anything, but see for yourself. To look at, I've spoken before about seeing the Four Noble Truths as like a key, looking into our own lives and saying, where are you, or any of us, where are you experiencing something unsatisfactory, something you want to be different, something you're not liking, something that you feel tangled up in? It could be a relationship, it could be work, it could be, life as a whole, that somehow things don't feel like the way you want them to be. We begin really by just acknowledging that that's true. This is how things are right now. We're not in denial about our suffering. So that's where we really begin, by just saying, okay, is there suffering right now? What am I aware of? And then to see, is there anything that I'm doing to perpetuate or to create and perpetuate this suffering? And is it possible to let go and find freedom? And this is, I think it's a wonderfully simple but not easy practice, just to ask ourselves, is there suffering right now? And if there is, what is my role in this suffering? I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But just want to ask, why is understanding suffering and letting go of suffering so important in the Buddha's teachings? Why is there such an emphasis on this? I think the answer is because our happiness and our freedom depend on understanding suffering and letting go of the causes of suffering. You know, it's not just information, excuse me, information that's helpful, like how far it is from Washington to Los Angeles, or, you know, how many billions of years the earth has, you know, the universe has existed or whatever. You know, it could be very helpful things, but those answers to those questions don't necessarily affect our happiness and our well-being. But the answer to the questions about suffering really have a direct impact on our life. You know, that we can see, okay, if I let go, I can experience greater freedom. If I hold on, then I perpetuate suffering. So it matters. This is why the whole of the Buddha's life, you know, from when he kind of first, the question arose for him, you know, and going into the homeless life and his search and then his awakening and then his teachings was really all about helping people find a way out of suffering and live more freely. So it was really a prescription for happiness, a prescription for joy, a prescription for living in the world in a different way than we normally do, we typically do. You know, we're typically tangled up in our worries, our fears, our memories, you know, all of the things that we get hooked on. And the teachings really say we don't have to be. There's a way out of this. The way out of it is to see where we're holding on, where we're clinging, and then to let go. So what do we mean by suffering? You know, suffering is a very, very broad blanket kind of term. You know, the word in Pali is dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A, and it's mostly translated as suffering. But I think a better translation would be unsatisfactory or unsatisfactoriness. You know, things not being the way we want them to be. You know, there's a number of synonyms one teacher gave, about 14: pain, unease, discontent, unsatisfactoriness, unhappiness, affliction, anxiety, dissatisfaction, discomfort, anguish, stress, misery, frustration. You get the idea. You know, these kind of unpleasant, difficult states. Now, whenever we're in conflict with our experience, wanting something we don't have, or wanting to get rid of something we do have, or we're stressed or angry or confused or judgmental, or we're craving something, in all of these situations, we're suffering. Gil Fronsdal, a teacher out in California in the Spirit Rock Meditation Center in the Redwood City, he explains the origin of dukkha in two words: du, which means bad, and kha, K-H-A, meaning kind of the axle of a wheel axle. So suffering, dukkha, could be translated as like a wheel out of kilter, you know, a wheel that's not rolling properly, but it's kind of bent or out of shape. So something being wrong or undesirable. So if we want to live happily with ease, we need to be honest about our suffering. You know, we can't find an end to suffering unless we acknowledge it's here, right? You know, it can be like, oh, well, I'd like to be free of suffering, but first we have to say, well, where is it? What is the suffering? What does it feel like? And where did it come from? when we often experience it as like something doesn't feel good. There's often a sense of being entangled or hooked or contracted when we're caught up in stress or worry or anger or craving. Often it's a tightness in the body, tension. Also in the mind, there's often thoughts of like, I don't like this, I want things to be different. A key to the Buddha's understanding of suffering is the recognition that dukkha isn't a thing or a fact or a situation, but rather it's a relationship. It's not a thing, but it's really about how we're relating to an experience. You could call it an unskillful or unwise relationship with our experience. So take an example. There could be a terrible event that happens. Maybe hundreds of people die in an earthquake or a hurricane or a war. And while we might say that's tragic and probably there's a lot of suffering, there's suffering in that. From the Buddha's understanding of suffering and teaching of suffering, the event itself is not suffering. We suffer or we don't suffer, or we suffer less or more, depending on how we respond to the experience or the situation. This is the key thing, that there's it's in our relationship to an experience or a situation or a person that suffering comes. It's not just a thing in itself. Somebody saying something unkind to you doesn't in itself create suffering. It may not be a wise thing to say, it may not be a helpful thing to say, we can say all of those things about it, but it's not in itself suffering. For it to be suffering, there has to be some reaction, some engagement with it, with that event or that, in that case, speech. And that's what gives rise to the suffering. So in some way, we're implicated in the suffering. This is from Rob Babea, who has a wonderful book called Seeing That Frees. Meditations on Emptiness and Dependent Arising. He says, dukkha depends on craving. It comes primarily from our relationship with experience, not from the experience itself. It comes from our relationship to the experience, not from the experience itself. This is an insight that typically needs to be repeated many times for it to be assimilated enough to make a significant difference. He then goes on to say, we begin then to see that things in themselves are not inherently problematic. Things in themselves are not inherently problematic. They are empty of problem. The sense of problem, of dukkha, with respect to anything requires a relationship of clinging with that thing. Without this, it cannot arise. This is really at the heart of the teachings, because we could have an event or a situation, the same situation. Let's say you might get a diagnosis from your physician that you have a serious illness. Okay, most of us would think, oh, well, that's a big deal. That's significant. If we responded to this news with resistance or with aversion or denial or catastrophizing, oh my God, I'll be dead, or we're like, oh no, that can't be true, and we push it away, we deny it, or we resist it in some way. Our experience is going to be very different than if we respond to the news that we have, same news, but with self-compassion, recognizing, oh, this is hard. Oh, that's painful. This is painful. If we meet it with understanding, if we meet it with equanimity, okay, can I just hold this? It's hard, it's painful, it's difficult to be with, but can I do that? You can see how it's exactly the same situation. The thing, if you like, is the same. You know, you got this piece of news that that is not easy to hear, to learn. But the way we meet the experience changes the experience. It's a very different experience if it's met with equanimity and with compassion and kindness than if it's met with denial or, you know, freaking out or catastrophizing, etc. As I said, this is really at the heart of the teachings, because what it says to us is that the way we meet our experience is really decisive in whether we suffer or not. You know, we could have the same situation arise, but it could lead to suffering, you know, a lot of suffering on one hand, you know, oh, my life is, oh, you know, all of the proliferations of the mind that make things so much worse. Or it can be, okay, this is hard, this is difficult, and I can hold this with kindness. I can use my practice. I can use self-compassion, loving kindness, mindfulness, equanimity, all of these practices that can help me hold this. And then it's a very different experience. The suffering in the latter case is likely to be significantly less than in the former case. That's an insight that is potentially really liberating, because what it says to us is no matter what the circumstances, we don't have to be the victims of circumstance. You know, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish about it and say everything is okay and la-di-da. You know, some things are really hard. And when we hold them, when we meet them in a certain way with kindness, without judgment, with acceptance, they become very different experiences than if we're caught up in resistance. And if we really get this insight on a deep level, then it can be tremendously freeing. So what's key to this understanding is that how we respond plays a fundamental role in our suffering and in the amount of our suffering or the degree of our suffering. How we respond plays a fundamental role in the degree, the quantum, as it were, of our suffering, how much suffering we have. And perhaps even that we don't suffer at all. You know, as Ajahn Chah said, I'd like to get the beginning of this quote as well as the main part. Do everything with a mind that lets go. Don't accept praise or gain or anything less, or anything else. If you let go a little, you'll have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace. Your struggle with the world will be at an end. So how we meet our experience plays a decisive role in the extent of our suffering. So what this says is, and I've said this in other talks in earlier weeks, that we're in some way implicated in our suffering. You know, and I say that not as a judging thing or a blaming thing. You know, it's not like, you know, oh, I'm bad because I'm the cause of my suffering. But there's something with suffering, as the Buddha teaches, with suffering, there's always something, some holding, some craving, some clinging that helps perpetuate the suffering. There's something that we're doing that is not wise, is not the wisest response. And that's the kind of the bad news, as it were. The good news is that when we see this, we can see, oh, it's possible for me to change the way I respond, to not cling, to not push away, but just to open to our experience, to one's experience. That's the good news. Putting it in 9 words, we transform our experience by how we meet it. We transform our experience. We change our experience by how we meet it. So if we can meet our experience wholeheartedly, whatever life brings, then we can find peace in the midst of everything. As the words of the poem, peace is this moment without judgment, this moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. If everything is welcomed, then it doesn't need to be a problem. Even what we think of as problems aren't actually problems if we can hold them and meet them with kindness. It doesn't mean that there can still be difficulties. It doesn't mean, that we don't lose our job or the relationship doesn't end or whatever. Those things can happen. But when they're met in that open, accepting way, and again, not easy, but we can train ourselves to do this, to be able to open our hearts, to be able to meet our experience wholeheartedly. So we transform our experience by how we meet it. So again, coming back then to these 3 characteristics, when we meet our experience by just recognizing that everything, this is anicca, this is changing, this is impermanent, it can open up for us a sense of, okay, if everything is impermanent, then it doesn't make sense for me to try and hold on to things as though they were permanent. It helps us to see, that just leads to suffering. Can I just open to the impermanence? This is going to come to an end. This is going to change. The pleasant, the unpleasant, the neutral, it's all going to come to an end. It's impermanent. And this can bring insight. Being, okay, nothing can be clung to. Then, does it make any sense for me to cling? And similarly with the second characteristic, if nothing can be clung to, if everything is unreliable, that nothing can bring lasting peace, then to see that it only causes suffering if I try and hold on to anything as though it would give lasting peace. So again, that may open up, help me to let go of clinging. Similarly with not self, if I can, if I can open to experience all the experience and see the anger, rather than seeing it as like, my anger or my grief or my craving, to see it as more impersonal. This is anger. Anger is arising. But if I don't get hooked on it, I don't turn it into I or mine. I'm right and they're wrong. I'm a good person, they're a bad person. If I don't create a sense of self around the craving, around the clinging, then, the emotion, the feeling, the sensations can all come and go. And we can experience greater space and ease in the midst of all of the challenges, all of the difficulties. We can find peace in the midst of difficulty if we don't cling, if we let go of clinging. And so this practice, that we finished with, of just allowing whatever is present to be here, to come and go in its own time, can be freeing, can be deeply freeing. So these are the first 2 of these characteristics that, as ways of seeing, ways of looking, that can help us to find and experience greater freedom. So what happens when difficulties are met in this way? Like impermanent, unreliable, not me, not mine. Does anything change? Does anything really change or open when I allow this moment to be just as it is. Meet it without resistance. Just looking at some of the sharing in the chat. Thank you, Bob, about welcoming the guests. They're lilies. The guests aren't the lilies, the flowers are the lilies, I think Sam says. Thank you. So Gabriella says, so it doesn't mean there's no pain, grief, etc. It means that we're not compounding it. Exactly that. As probably most of you have heard that expression that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. The pain of life, none of us get out of this alive, as we say. None of us get out of it without pain, without difficulty. But we can get out of it without suffering, without adding something to the pain, adding resistance to it. And that's the freedom that the Buddha's teachings point towards. So Prana says, so mindfulness training trains my reaction to the suffering. Yes, largely what we're doing is we're working to be non-reactive, to meet our experience without reactivity, without judgment, with kindness, with acceptance. And as I said, when we do that, the experience becomes a different one. That kind of that insight that the problem, the suffering isn't, the dukkha isn't the thing, it's the relationship. And it comes from an unwise relationship, a holding, a clinging, a pushing away. That really is the cause of suffering. So Jen says, my understanding is, yes, the practice allows us not to not compound pain, but in addition, the experience of internalizing impermanence and being extremely in the moment very much diminishes and sometimes eliminates the pain. This has been my experience. Yeah, that's lovely. Very, very well said. Actually, this is really, as we go deeper into the teachings, it can not just lessen the reactivity to the pain, which is often a lot of the pain is our resisting the pain. We know that it can lessen that. It can feel, oh, if I'm not so reactive, the pain isn't so obvious. But the pain itself, when it's really met wholeheartedly, can in fact diminish. And there's a way in which the experience of pain is very much tied to how we're meeting it, whether we're opening fully to it. Is practicing these three ways of seeing things the letting go, or is there a final letting go step, so to speak? That's a great question, Debbie. These aren't the ultimate truths. These are powerful, or can be powerful, insights that open our hearts, that free us. But they're not in themselves, or they aren't in themselves the deepest freedom. There's other levels of letting go that we can come to that are even deeper than these three characteristics, seeing deeply into or gaining insight into these three characteristics. You might talk about it as, we might talk about it as emptiness, of realizing that everything is empty of self, empty of permanent existence. And when we see that at the deepest level, that's the freedom. That's what allows us to let go into the deepest freedom that the Buddha points to. But it's a great question, and these can be very very powerful ways of gaining insight, of letting go, of clinging. And so, I encourage you to just explore this, in both in meditation and in daily life. What happens when we just come back to, change. This is changing, impermanent. This can't be clung to. Not me, not mine. And for some people, one or two of these may work, may be more helpful than another one. That impermanence for some people can be a very powerful one, seeing change. And having change, seeing change be a way of helping us let go. Others, it may be non-self, that there isn't, a permanent self in all of this. And again, it's not about believing that, but more about just saying, okay, can I see this as not me, not mine? And what happens when I do this? Is there some freedom that comes from doing this, freedom of the heart? Sarah says, what is the broader name for these three? The broader name for these three is often characteristics of existence or three marks of existence. Do is typically bad in Pali. So you have dukkha, and good is sukha. So sukha is pleasant, dukkha is unpleasant or painful, suffering, etc. So it's the combination of like the suffering, the bad quote, and the wheel is that kind of almost a metaphor of for suffering. The wheel that's not rolling properly, that unsatisfactory quality. Chalapad says, acceptance and acknowledgement of what is. Responding is feasible, especially if we release our filter and truly listen and see what is not what we fear, what is not what we fear. Hope projects because of historic events and imprints, or projects, I think, yeah. Approach the present with open-hearted and open-minded inquiry, willing for the best result. Yeah, thank you. That's lovely. Lovely. I like the expression compassionate curiosity. This kind interest in our experience. What happens when we approach things in that way? This way, we allow things to be, to be as they are, to be themselves, to be what they're appearing as. We're not trying to resist them or push them away. Wikipedia has a comprehensive exploration of these characteristics, believe it or not. Yes, Wikipedia can be very helpful, very powerful. So thank you all. Thank you for your sharing there. Thank you for your practice. Maybe take a few minutes if there are some questions, anything comes up for folks, either in the chat or in the, if anyone would like to raise their hand. Gabriele, you have your hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
I do. It's been a tough couple of it's been a tough month, but particularly today.
The things we have, the ongoing racism and other delusions that we get pulled in and we get caught in. So email me, Achala, others, if you have questions about teacher or other practices. So let's just sit for a few minutes together, for about 3 or 4 minutes. If you can, just let go of the words. Come down into the body. Feel your breathing. Meet whatever is here with kindness. It's always this moment, this breath, this feeling. These words from the Buddha: hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. Like a caring mother holding and guarding the life of her only child, so with a boundless heart, hold yourself and all beings. May I and all beings be filled with loving kindness. May I and all beings be safe from inner and outer dangers. May I and all beings be well in body and mind. May I and all beings be happy and free.